Welcome to Dilemmas of Membership, a three-part series on conversion and membership in the Jewish people in Israel and in the diaspora. I'm Alan Abbey from the Shalom Hartman Institute, and with me is Stuart Schaffman, editor of Chavruta magazine, whose first issue inspired this series. Stuart?
Thank you, Alan. Chavruta is a journal that we are producing here at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, a journal which has just begun to come out. It'll come out twice a year. And the idea is to take issues that are of relevance to the Jewish people in Israel and around the world and to adapt scholarly materials that have been generated in the Institute for Advanced Jewish Studies here at the Shalom Hartman Institute and to adapt them for a more general readership.
The evening of lectures that we're going to be showing involve three distinguished scholars in the field. Rabbi David Ellenson, president of Hebrew Union College, Dr. Einat Ramon, the dean of the Schechter Institute of Jewish Studies here in Jerusalem, and Rabbi Dr. Donniel Hartman, the co-director of the Shalom Hartman Institute. And Rabbi Dr. Donniel Hartman, the co-director of the Shalom Hartman Institute, where we are, brought it down to a personal level, to the actual families and the individuals involved in conversion matters.
A likelihood that we are going to arrive at a general consensus about criteria for membership into the Jewish people. There are going to be people who are going to be more stringent in their criteria for conversion. There are going to be people who are going to be more lenient, and there are always going to be people, and it comes down to this bottom line, are there people who are going to say, excuse me, because of your family tree, because of your family history, because of the existence of converts within your family, I'm not so sure that my son can marry your daughter, or vice versa.
One of the important phenomena that we have to recognize is that when you talk about Judaism today, while we're speaking about that which is supposed to create a collective, our religious tradition, more than creating a collective and more than being a source of unity, is actually the fundamental cause of disunity amongst our people. So we are in a very strange predicament. Ostensibly, we belong to one group, but that which is supposed to be the overarching foundation of our collective life is the foundation which causes the most disagreement amongst us. We are almost, to use a current parlance, we're a virtual community, coasting on an interesting past with a very precarious future, because the substance of our collective life and what we intend on doing together is not clear at all. Now, in an average religious context, this would be a major problem, or it would cause a problem of a certain type. The type of disagreement would create a dissolving of the collective. We disagree, we look at each other, I don't know you, you don't know me, and consequently we realize we were part of the same people, but we need to get divorced. It was a family, but who said a family has to stay together all the time? Actually, we're going to dissolve this marriage and this relationship. If we really looked at the core outside of this room, do our people have a sufficient amount of agreed upon values and principles to sustain a collective identity? In all probability, my answer would be no. The problem, and actually the challenge that we face, is that Judaism is not a religion in the normal sense of the term, of a collection of individuals who share a certain belief system. Integrated into our religious identity is a national one, in which what you believe and what you do are perceived to be secondary to your core identity. What David called lineality, or some sense, when the rabbis say, "Af al pi shechata Yisraelhu," even though they have sinned, they are still an Israelite. What are they basically saying? They're basically saying that's what all we rabbis experience all the time. When somebody comes, a rabbi Could I be a good Jew and not believe in God? Don't we all get that, right? The chutzpah, they don't ask, could I be a Jew? I have an inalienable right to be determined as what? As a good Jew, regardless of what I do and regardless of what I believe. And who are you to say other? I have that right. So what happens is that we have this people that we're functioning in, while ostensibly grounded on some collective notion of shared beliefs and practices, some shared cultural space, in fact, at our ideology is some sense of national identity which is independent of the beliefs, ideas, and principles that the individual members of this community adopt or do not adopt. It then creates a unique problem and a solution at the same time. On the one hand, we don't get divorced. On the other, so we're also, good news, you're still married. The question is, what type of marriage do you have? Is, divorce the worst thing in the world? What are you really doing together? What do you need to do to sustain your collective life? Now, the meaning of Israel, even though it's not exhausted by Israel, is to place our collective existence at the central focus of our thought process. It's to remind ourselves, as David and Einat both said, we are also not just, we are a people. And how do we think not in terms of synagogues alone, but in national categories? Zionism ensures that the collective identity, that the peoplehood of the Jewish people remains at the center of our self-understanding, whereas outside of Israel, you can, in theory, forget that. Depending. You can always count on anti-Semitism. But other than anti-Semitism, if we want to have something positive that reminds us, that is one of the central missions and one of the central contributions of Israel to contemporary Jewish life. We are a people. And the question is, how do we think about this issue of conversion from the context of a people? A people who have a religious identity, which is bifurcated beyond comprehension, but who insist on staying in the same room with each other. And the question is the issue of conversion a religious issue? And as such, and here I'm going to disagree slightly with Einat, is the issue of conversion similar to the issue of prayer, gender, education, etc.? Or is the issue of conversion a national issue? One that requires an agreement because we have agreed to function as a people. Now we have learned what issues are required or necessitate an agreement and what do not. And the status quo might be, whether that's an ideal solution or not, we know what are the boundaries. Like in classical Jewish sources, one of the distinctions was, do you keep Shabbos in private or in public? Private, that's a private business. Sin away. Do what you want, you're still inside. God might kill you, but God is not a big, doesn't function in, it's like, that wasn't a major threat. You know what I mean? It's like, do something for the Jews, and then I'll get worried about whether you're going to punish me. So whether God will punish us if we violate the Shabbos in private, that's a separate question. Violating the Shabbos in public, that was considered to be a boundary issue. That's a boundary issue. That is basically a person who does not observe the Shabbat in public is declaring, I'm not part of the Jewish people. And the boundary was, as if you declare yourself as outside the Jewish people, then we're going to declare you as outside the Jewish people. We think you're going to do it first, well, we're going to do it first. You don't want to belong, well, we didn't want you in the first place. And so that was a boundary, because being Jewish, you are separating from the nation. Privately, do what you want in your house. Now, one of the problems that we face in Israel and in the issue of conversion is that it is not contained in our private houses. It's not something that just affects, the argument goes, me. It affects the nation, and as a result, we need to have a national policy. We need to agree, and if we don't agree, we are in grave danger, the argument goes. To add to this notion, why are we in grave danger? Every nation needs a shared membership policy. Everyone has to agree as to who, at least, is a member and who is not a member. Adding more to the scare factor, it's like it's going from orange to purple. What's what color above orange? It's like the national threat level. Like the first time I saw it flashing, I didn't know what exactly was happening. There's something on. The national threat level has been elevated. Elevating the national threat level is the notion. Jews have to be able to marry Jews. And that's true. One of the central features of a community is do we at least marry each other? If you can't marry each other, then we really aren't part of the same people. And that's why when the Chatan Sofer, in fact, declared in his famous psak, his hope that one day, a day will come, when our, meaning the ultra-Orthodox community, our children and our girls and boys will not be given to your boys and girls. And your boys and girls are everyone else who's outside of the Orthodox, in particular, actually, in the Reform community. That signified a sense of, we're really two separate communities. And his students took it to the next level on the basis of that. The Maharshal said, let's really separate. Let's stop pretending. And the issue, if we can't marry each other, then let's petition the Hungarian government, let's petition the German government and say, listen, recognize us as two distinct communities. We are two distinct religions. Because when we can't marry each other, then we're not one people anymore. And so the issue of conversion is purple. I don't know, what's the highest? Red. Red, okay, that makes sense. It's red. It's red. Blood. This is dangerous. This is really dangerous. We need to agree. And therefore, everybody has to look inside and say, where could you compromise? And that usually means, how could I get you to accept my position? That's usually what's known as a Jewish compromise, in particular in Israel, and in particular when Orthodox are involved. In particular, because, unfortunately, and I don't mean anything personal about it, we can't compromise. And therefore, since we all have to marry each other, the only solution is, for the sake of the future of the Jewish people, you have to accept my conversion process. That's more or less, by the way, the argument. As bizarre as it might sound, that's exactly the argument. Do you want a place that Jews can't marry Jews? Chas v'chalila. Heaven forbid. Therefore, the fact that Jews can't marry Jews should not influence me as an Orthodox Jew to change my policy, because I can't compromise. The only ones who can, it doesn't bother you. You're just taking standards that are more than before. It's not violating a principle. The issue of whether your rabbis can sit on a court or not, that can't really be an issue. And Einat, in fact, adopted such a policy when she said that was reasonable. Because the Neman Commission said, I'll be a little more lenient as to who gets in, but only Orthodox could decide. But that's not a real principle for you in any event. Whether that is true or not is a separate question. I think it is a principle. However, this notion that we all have to agree in order to sustain the Jewish people puts us in a serious predicament. Because the fact is, we're not going to agree. The fact is, the Neman Commission itself is not... Just look what happened now with Druckmann. If you need any other proof to show that the disagreements are so profound, we couldn't even accept the Neman Commission. And we are even repealing post facto conversions. Post facto, the conversions of colleagues, when there is immense halachic grounds. And David pointed to the halachic grounds for allowing the annulment of conversion. The vast majority of halachic law for 2,000 years says that is absolutely impossible. That regardless of what you do, the minute there's milah and tefillah, I don't care what you attended, you're in, and you period, you can't leave. And so, if I wanted to count on that, I at least could have counted, to show there was a clear halachic precedent. Doesn't just allow it, requires it. You have to be unbelievably innovative to disagree with that policy. But our disagreements are so great that we can't even accept that. Because the premise of Rabbi Shlomo was, I don't need to convert people. The future of the Jewish people is dependent on us remaining pure. The smaller we are, The more loyal we are to Torah, the better we are. Don't tell me that you're helping the Jewish people by bringing new people in. Quite to the contrary. You're diluting the Jewish people. Ladies and gentlemen, let's recognize something once and for all. We are not going to agree on a uniform conversion process ever. We are not. And that includes, we're not, and if conservative reform are willing to remove themselves from the conversion process, which itself would be a bizarre move of disrespect to yourself, even if that's the case, as to the details of what it means to be a Jew, the reality is we do not agree. And if we do not agree as to what it means to live as a Jew, we certainly will not agree as to how one becomes a Jew. Because how one becomes a Jew is connected to how one sees what it means to live as a Jew. Now, if what I am saying is correct, then if that is correct, and we need a central uniform conversion process, then we are in a major, major crisis. And it is that assessment of the crisis which is causing a tremendous buzz. Nothing is coming from it, but it's causing a buzz. It's like a fly. You can't go to sleep. It's buzzing in your ear. There's something wrong here. We're in trouble. Don't we all know we're in trouble? What could I do? Nothing. And so all you do is you get aggravated. And we're sort of frustrated. Now, just as an interesting fact to add to this, is that actually today in Israel, the reality of Israel, the reality of 350,000 non-Jewish Russians who are living here, at least non-Jewish according to the definition of Jewishness of the vast, vast majority of Israelis, which accepts only matrilineal and not patrilineal. That group of people is creating for the first time in Israel a counterforce to the prior consensus. Einat defined it absolutely correctly. Israelis don't care if Judaism is controlled by the rabbinate. Israelis in general on issues of religious policy act like an ostrich. They put their heads in the ground and say the view is wonderful from here. And everything is fine. And as long as I don't have a problem means I'm not Russian. I don't have a problem means I can have children naturally with my wife or with my husband. That's also the case. Because if you can't and you have to adopt somebody, then the only way your child could be Jewish is if you promise to keep kosher, keep Shabbat, and give your kids an Orthodox Jewish education. That might work for the first child because nobody minds lying to a court. The problem is when the second child. So what happens is, as long as we could make sure that most Israelis either, and that's, in Israel you could have in vitro fertilization funded by the country until you have 2 children or you reach the age of 50. In other words, you can go, as long as you can have children naturally, or you don't want to adopt more than 1 child, the view's wonderful from here. And they don't have a problem. And they're perfectly comfortable. And so, in fact, the status quo in Israel was not being threatened. The question, in fact, there wasn't a serious policy dilemma. Everything was fine. What was done is okay. Who's converting anyway? Who needs to convert? The first case, or that which is going to break the status quo of Israel, is that while the vast majority of Israelis are not going to fight to change, within 10 to 15 years, 350,000 people who are 5% of Israeli society, who are integrated into a group which is 10% of Israeli society, aren't just going to be marrying each other. That was Tommy Lapid's solution. The extent of Tommy Lapid, Zichrono Livracha, his notion of religious pluralism, is that this country has to allow 2 people who couldn't have been married under the rabbinical court, not that the rabbinical court wouldn't allow them to marry each other, but that they weren't even under the jurisdiction of the rabbinical court, nor were they under the jurisdiction of the Muslim or Christian court, that they should be allowed to be married. And that was the great move for religious freedom and pluralism in this country, and that was also, by the way, turned down. And the vast majority of Israelis sat down and said, that's just fine, because again, I'm not what? Russian. And there's not enough of us who need to adopt 2 children. So everything is fine. Now, however, this 350,000 people who are going to school, and soon they're going to have children, many of them are now in schools, and they're going to school with us, kindergarten, they're celebrating holidays, they're having brisses. They are part of our community, serving in the army, living in the midst of us. The issue is not those who die, the issue is they are living with us. They are inherent and integral parts of Israeli society. Within a very short period of time, Israel is going to change its policy. Israelis are going to change their policy towards intermarriage. And as I've mentioned in the past, at present, intermarriage in Israel is only allowed if you marry a basketball player. In those cases, that is when, if you do so, then it's considered a basketball. Then it's considered a contribution to the people, to the national, in general it's a form, we are a country of sacrifice. We know how to sacrifice for the army, we sacrifice for a uniform conversion process, we also sacrifice for Maccabi Tel Aviv, so that Maccabi Tel Aviv will help defeat the Hellenists of Europe and bring the trophy back to Jerusalem. And so when you intermarry with a basketball player, it's actually front page news and it's a celebration. Other than that, it's a problem. These 350,000 people, however, are going to change it. Because the fact is that the conversion process is not going to be, if it's still in the hands of the rabbinate, marriages are going to take place. And the market force is going to create a new reality whether you want it or not. For the first time, there's going to be a group of people who aren't going to find their solution within the existing phenomena, and the existing phenomena will change. And it might change by multiple rabbinates, unlikely. It'll change probably by the creation of civil marriages in this country. And when civil marriages come, multiple rabbinical marriages will also come. However, what I'd like to argue with, and briefly, is that I think that the premise is false. I think that the notion that we need a uniform conversion process to stay as a people is actually a myth that is irrelevant and insignificant. And as such, while it might sound a little controversial, actually it's very, very halachic. Very, very halachic. Why do we need a uniform conversion process? So that Jews will marry Jews? We don't need a uniform conversion process, an agreed upon conversion process, so that Jews will marry Jews. We only need that every couple who marries each other agrees amongst themselves as to what constitutes their family's conversion process. I don't need, in theory, to be able to marry every single Jew. As anybody who knows, when you have a single child, you want your child to be married, I want them to marry somebody. I don't want them to marry the Jewish people in theory. I want them to marry somebody very, very specific. Now, what's the problem of marrying someone very, very specific? I could spend the next 100 years trying to reach a compromise, which I don't think we'll ever be able to reach, so that we can all agree as to who comes in, but it's unnecessary. Let's say we disagree about conversion, and let's say you converted into Judaism, and now you meet my daughter. And my daughter and you disagree. You converted to become a secular Israeli, and my daughter's an Orthodox Jew. So now the two are together, they fall in love. What does that mean? The couple is going to have to talk amongst each other and decide, what do we do? Now, earlier on, hopefully, that the dating process will actually entail some conversation. You never know, but let's say we hope that there might be some conversation as to what I believe, and what are my values, or what are your values, and we might actually discover early on that there is an issue. And then we will decide, what type of family do we want to have? Do we want to live an Orthodox life, or do we want to live a different life? Now, it's true that an Orthodox and a secular could get together even though they don't agree about Shabbat, on this issue, it actually needs to be resolved. And then one of a few things might happen. They might decide early on to break up, and that might be chaval, but that might be the case because I have certain principles that can't be resolved. Or the couple themselves will actually decide, you know what? We're willing that our family should reflect one of us. And therefore either my daughter will say, you know what? You're Jewish. You're actually Jewish too. And even though Tomi Lapid was the rabbi who converted you, and Shulamit Aloni and Tomi Lapid are Jews from my perspective, and I accept you as a Jew, and they will make their decision. Or the other person will say, do you know what? I realize that I'm entering into and that we're going to have an Orthodox family. I'm willing to live an Orthodox lifestyle. And guess what happens if you're willing to live an Orthodox lifestyle? You could convert as an Orthodox Jew. Conversion, unlike the issue of mamzerut, does not create a barrier which can't be resolved de facto. We don't need a de jure solution to the issue of a uniform conversion. All we need to have are de facto solutions. We need to make sure that at any instance, who's going to marry their children? Same issue all over again. Same issue. If the child's not Jewish, they can get converted. The couple will decide. So in fact, what we need to recognize, if we want to sustain our community, we actually have to realize what are the issues we face and what are the issues we don't face. You do a great disservice to the unity of the Jewish people when you create a mythic crisis which is going to create the dissolvement of the Jewish people when in fact we're not being threatened on this issue. We don't have to agree. Just like we don't have to go to the same synagogue together, we don't have to agree on which restaurant is kosher, we don't have to agree on a conversion process. All we need to do is recognize that there is solutions and that at the time, Orthodox rabbis, for example, or conservative Reform rabbis, when a couple comes, will create a conversion process in that instance, which will be menshlich. Because otherwise, you're not going to have many people within your denomination. In conclusion, what I would argue is, every community needs boundaries. We know we need boundaries. Not everybody who wants to be in is in. However, these boundaries have nothing to do with the issue of conversion. And this is where it might sound a little radical, but I don't mean to be. We don't have to agree on conversion. We need boundaries of what makes somebody in and what makes somebody out. But once we create boundaries, which obviously cannot exclude Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, Renewal, Post-denominational, Secular, I think I made it. Right? Right? It's getting harder and harder as time goes on. Once we're not going to be blocking off masses of Jews, and that our definition of Jewish life, in other words, none of these groups is going to fall under the category of Jews for Jesus, and that we recognize that Jews for Jesus is a separate category, which is a different one of a boundary, and for other reasons, and I don't want to get into what constitutes a boundary. But once we define those boundaries, what we have to do is understand that conversion is actually not the boundary issue. And that we have to recognize that we have to allow at our table people who are Jews even if we don't think they're Jews. For the only issue is when you want to marry my child, and that could be that we could solve that problem when that moment happens. Other than that, what? I'm not going to allow you to donate to Federation? Excuse me. Absolutely not. I'm sorry. I have my principles. Excuse me. I'm not going to allow you, excuse me, I'm not going to allow you to fight in my army. What are the issues that we face as a community, as a nation? We are a nation. For what does membership need within the context of this people? Service in the army? Citizenship in the country? Citizenship in the country is already allowed for someone who has one Jewish grandparent. Voting? Donating? There are two issues where we might have some problems. One is aliyot to the Torah, and the other one is day school education. And those aren't in Israel, those are more issues in North America. And here I would suggest that the concept of Jewish national thinking if it requires a compromise anywhere, if we are going to be a people and we recognize that we're not going to agree, but we want to continue to walk together, we're going to have to allow at the table on all issues outside of marriage, Jews who disagree with each other, and part of that disagreement is also disagreement as to whether you're in or whether you're out. And that means whether it's patrilineal or matrilineal, if in fact the Jewish people are living with both, if in fact we are living within conservative, reform, reconstructionist, renewal, post-denominational, secular, and orthodox all at the same time, then we have to decide where is the key halachic issue. And if the key halachic issue is I can't give you an aliyah to the Torah, well, gesundheit, knock yourself out if that's what you want to do. Frankly, I personally believe that we need synagogues which actually reach out, and I have a feeling that the principle of et lasot Lashem eferu Tortecha on this issue, that this one is actually one where the larger national enterprise might take more significance, and I think God will forgive us if there were 6 and not 7 people who were actually counted. But if you disagree, gesundheit. So what? Open up our schools, open up our membership. All of the above are in fact issues where we can be far more open-minded on the issue of conversion. And in fact, it will not require of an Orthodox Jew any halachic compromise. Any. I don't think Orthodox, conservative, reform, reconstructionist, renewal, post-denominational, or secular. It's not stum. Somebody wrote me an email when I didn't, but I missed one. So I'm not trying to be sensitive. I think it doesn't require of any of us to compromise on our halachic principles, nor should we. But let's decide, where do we have halachic principles and where do we have a national agenda? And let's understand that when we have a national agenda, our job is not simply to reach compromises. Our job is to make sure that as a people we continue to walk as a people, and as a people we continue our deep loyalty to each other, and that we have a national responsibility. Let's pick our issues. Let's know where we have challenges. And I would suggest to you the issue of conversion could be resolved once we recognize that it is not a national issue, it's a personal issue, it's a national question. And I hope that if we refocus in that direction, solutions could be found. Not solutions of compromise, but solutions of loving, solutions of caring, and solutions of tolerance. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. For more information about the Hartman Institute and Chavruta Magazine, go to our website, hartman.org.il. That's hartman.org.il. I'm Alan Abbey.